In 1972, before the season started, two very important things happened for the Oakland Raiders. First was the haul they made during the college football draft, which added even more pieces to a team that would end up dominating its division and becoming a perennial title contender. The second thing happened off the field, which resulted in Al Davis seizing control of the ball club, control of which he would maintain for the rest of his life. The Raiders and John Madden were in the process of regrouping, having not made the playoffs for the first time in 5 years, and so they were on a mission to change their fortunes. But the large question was whether or not they could not only continue their winning ways, but if they could finally win a championship. So let's now take a look back at the year 1972 and a return to glory for the Raiders in this edition of the T3 Raider Roots podcast. I want to thank you for joining me today. So let's get started. Dave Dalby, Cliff Branch, Otis Sistrunk, John Vella, Dr. Death Skip Thomas, Mike Ciani. This was a good chunk of the draft class of 1972, and a good reason why the team that was already good got even better. Vella and Dalby became pillars along an offensive line that already had Upshaw and Shell. Thomas entrenched himself in the defensive backfield, the last piece in what would become known as the Soul Patrol. Ciani was drafted as a receiver ahead of Branch, the track star who had exactly what Al Davis coveted, speed. And Otis Sistrunk came from out of nowhere to become a stalwart on the defensive line. Al Davis always had an eye for talent. He knew what he was doing. And this batch of players would mix in nicely with his hand-picked coach, John Madden, who was now entering his fourth year at the helm. There was a score to settle, not only with the entire Western Division, but with the entire AFC. The goal wasn't to just win, it was to dominate. Speaking of domination, this was exactly Al Davis's plan off the field as well with the ownership of the Raiders. Al was entering his 10th year with the club, and that time he'd already served as head coach, league commissioner, and general manager, as well as moving to part-time ownership or part ownership role with the team. Now he would make his move in classic Al Davis style. He and the other principal owner, Wayne Valley, whose name had been listed as owner every year previous to this one, were engaged in their own battle for control and authority over the team. Both were proud and stubborn men, and neither got in the way of the other's stated function. Al ran the show on the field, while Wayne maintained the fiduciary responsibilities, which included managing and auditing the books. As time went on, the relationship between the two continued to sour. Al bristled at the fact that Valley was not a football guy, and he resented being in Wayne's presence and having to answer critics of the team's performances. Valley would say things like, "We brought the guy here to win, and if he doesn't, he's down the road." Some of the limited partners who made trips with Wayne and the team would mock Al if the team lost and made fun of his label as being a genius. Wayne would also chip in with anti-Semitic jokes at the expense of Al Davis's Jewish heritage. His intent wasn't to be racist, but simply to make Al mad. Much of what he said in today's time would have been plastered all over social media, and the public would have perhaps called for Valley's immediate removal as an owner. Another growing rift between the two was fueled when star receiver Warren Wells ran afoul of the law and ended up in jail. Al had asked Valley to use his influence to help ease Wells' sentence. When Wells ended up staying in jail for 10 months, an angry Davis allegedly told the team that Valley would have done more about it had Wells been white. At that moment, it is speculated, Valley was determined not to renew Al's contract as managing general partner when it would come up again in 1976. As it was, Davis had to plan and calculate. He had to make the move when the time was right, and sooner rather than later. Playing a role in this, knowing or unknowing, was the third general partner, Ed McGaw, a young man who had become wealthy mostly by luck and timing as opposed to hard work. Ed became an easy target for Al Davis's patronizing attention. Even if McGaw knew what Al was eventually after, his ego didn't mind being stroked by Al Davis's powerfully soothing words and ways, because when Al wanted to turn on the charm, he was a master. A couple of years earlier, at an owners' meeting of the Raiders' general and limited partners, the topic of extending Al Davis's employment with the Raiders was brought up, and the motion was made to extend the employment agreement for another 10 years. Al forced a roll call vote, knowing full well that everyone but Valley would be in favor. Valley predictably put a stall to the motion, saying it was too early to be acted upon, at which point McGaw, Al's faithful ally, stormed out of the room screaming, "I want Davis to run the ball club for life." So in 1972, Al had to find a new opening, and he knew he had to get this all done quickly. This time it was at a meeting of general partners early in June. The meeting was initially called to discuss expansion of the Coliseum, but Al would later state in court records that he had previously told Valley he wanted to sign the 10-year contract extension at this meeting, and that Wayne had not objected. Davis went on to say that Valley was happy with the way things were, and that he, Valley, did not want any operational control because he had his own business to worry about. Valley insisted that he said no such thing, which made McGaw's role as the tiebreaker very critical. McGaw, of course, sided with Davis. Under the terms of the Raiders' limited partnership, only 2 of the 3 general partners needed to agree for a piece of business to be put into effect. So on July 10th, Al Davis and Ed McGaw signed a 10-page agreement that renewed Davis as managing general partner for another 10 years. On a revolving plan that could run up to 20 years at an annual salary of $100,000. However, in a creative rewriting of the contract, Al had strategically devalued the other 2 general partners to mere peons, with their duties limited to consultation and policy decisions related to the operation of the team. This would be the beginning of an ongoing lawsuit brought against the Raiders organization, namely Al Davis, by Wayne Valley. Valley's widow later maintained that Davis's power grab could not have caught her husband completely off guard. "He knew from the first time we met him," she said. "He expected it at any time because he knew Al Davis had done that all his life." And so, years before taking on the NFL to move the team, Al Davis was now involved in an internal war for ultimate control of the team. This would play out over the next few years. The partners kept as much of the internal organizational strife away from the players as possible, but for the first time in Raiders history, the principal owner of the team was listed as Al Davis. Meanwhile, John Madden had the Raiders focused on a return to glory, and that was their focus as the season began. And it began with a cross-country trip to Pittsburgh. This was only the second time these 2 teams had ever squared off against one another, but it would soon become perhaps the fiercest rivalry in the entire NFL. Big Ben Davidson was on the shelf for this one, and Ken Stabler started at quarterback. The hometown Steelers drove to an early lead, first at 20-7, then stretching the lead to 34-14. George Blanda celebrated his 45th birthday by coming off the bench and launching a touchdown pass to Raymond Chester. Darryl LaMonica came into the game late and tossed a touchdown to rookie Mike Siani, which narrowed the gap. But despite nearly 400 yards in total offense, and LaMonica coming off the bench to complete 8 of 10 passes, Oakland's furious finish at the end came up just short, and they lost 34-28. The next week in Green Bay, the Raiders challenged their second eventual division champion in a row, and this outcome was much different from the first time these 2 teams had met in Super Bowl II 4 seasons earlier. Behind the crushing blocks of George Beeler, Bob Brown, Jim Otto, Art Shell, and Gene Upshaw, Marv Hubbard picked his way to 125 yards in his goal for a 1,000-yard season. The Packers led early, but John Madden's young defense only allowed Green Bay to succeed on 1 third-down opportunity. With a 7-3 lead, Green Bay was driving for another score, but a fumble pitch was scooped up in the end zone by second-year man Jack Tatum, who returned it 104 yards for the go-ahead score and a complete shift in momentum. Even though the Packers retook the lead before halftime, an inspired Raider defense completely dominated play and held the Packers scoreless for the last 43 minutes, resulting in a 20-14 victory for the Silver and Black. Back home in Week 3, Oakland took on the first of its division opponents, the San Diego Chargers, in what many consider to be the NFL's toughest division. Despite jumping out to a 14-0 lead on the strength of a long touchdown pass by LaMonica to Raymond Chester and a 1-yard plunge by Marv Hubbard, the hometown Raiders trailed the stubborn Chargers in the fourth quarter when a 40-yard field goal off the infield dirt by the ageless George Blanda tied the score at 17 and evened both teams' records at 1-1-1. Week 4 saw the Raiders in Houston's Astrodome for a Monday night nationally televised game, and the Raiders pillaged just for fun. Fred Biletnikoff and Mike Ciani each caught touchdown passes from Darryl LaMonica, and Ken Stabler came in late to throw a touchdown pass to tight end Bob Moore. The Oilers were held to just 8 yards of total offense, and Oakland intercepted 5 passes, while Houston quarterbacks only completed 4 passes total. The 34-0 victory was a total team effort and total domination, and much of the country saw it. The next week, the team was back in Alameda, taking on the Buffalo Bills with its star running back O.J. Simpson. The Bills staked their way to a 16-7 lead in the fourth quarter. O.J. picked up 144 yards, and NFL Films captured a classic shot of him being tackled and driven into the ground with helmet flying, knocking him woozy. This was the Raider way, punishment and intimidation. And then the offense came to life and scored 21 fourth-quarter points, burying Buffalo 28-16. Now with a 3-1-1 record, the Raiders next entertained another division rival, the tough Denver Broncos. Their quarterback, Charlie Johnson, registered perhaps his best day as a pro, running the Broncos out to a 24-3 lead. But the comeback-conscious Raiders fought back. Denver held on for dear life, and they held off Oakland in the end, winning the game 30-23. The Raiders would lose only one more game during the rest of the regular season. In Week 7, the Raiders' season was hanging in the balance at the midway point. In a must-win situation, the Los Angeles Rams came to town. The Rams took the opening kickoff and promptly fumbled it back to the Silver and Black. Oakland responded with a quick touchdown march on a shortened field as Charlie Smith punched it across. Clarence Davis added a rushing touchdown, and Biletnikoff, Chester, and Ciani all found themselves on the end of scoring passes from LaMonica. And the Raiders cruised to a 35-3 halftime lead. After Los Angeles added a meaningless touchdown in the third quarter, the Raiders scored again, collecting a total of 7 turnovers on the day, 6 interceptions, including one by linebacker Phil Villapiano, which he returned 82 yards for another touchdown. The Raiders' 45-17 victory was a total team effort and a nearly flawless performance, and it set the stage for a Week 8 clash with their division rival, the Kansas City Chiefs. In Kansas City's fantastic new Arrowhead Stadium, a record crowd of 82,000 showed up and witnessed their hometown heroes rush to a 20-0 lead. The Raiders battled back, but this week the comeback was not to be. With the 27-14 defeat, the Raiders saw their record fall to 4-3-1. More importantly, they had now fallen to second place in the division, a half game behind the Chiefs. So now it was do or die. Oakland faced 2 more critical games before a return matchup with the Chiefs. It was important that they do well in both of these contests, leading up to the home matchup with their biggest rival. The first of these 2 warm-ups was against Cincinnati. The Silver and Black invaded Riverfront Stadium, and the tough Raider defense flooded the Bengal offensive attack. The cold day proved even colder for Cincinnati's defense, as Oakland rolled up 293 rushing yards on the way to a 20-14 victory. A late Bengal touchdown made the score look like the game was a lot closer than it really was. The Raiders were gaining momentum. That momentum continued the following week in Denver as the pressure continued to mount. The Raiders answered the call with a 37-20 win. The victory was so complete, in fact, that Oakland did not send their punting unit out onto the field a single time during the entire game. Now came the return match with Kansas City, and the remaining schedule that would see the Raiders at home 3 times over the final 4 games. There's always been special tension in the air before Raiders-Chiefs encounter, because for the past 6 years, these meetings have resulted in championships. Going into this particular game, Oakland held a 1.5-game lead over Kansas City. A Raider win now, and their return to glory was but 1 step away. The Silver and Black dominated from the outset, Just 3 weeks earlier, this team had been humiliated in Kansas City, but the Raiders never lost sight of their championship goal. A crowd of over 54,000 witnessed the destruction as Oakland took apart its enemy and fiercest rival, the Chiefs, in the California sun by a score of 26-3. The only thing sweeter was knowing that they had just one more victory to get to sew up the division, and they knew they could get it the following week against another division rival, the San Diego Chargers. A large group of Raiders boosters followed their team down to San Diego in Week 12, anxious to see the division title clinched. The defense was sharp, and they picked off John Hadel. The precision Oakland offense was also sharp. The Raiders went up 14-10, but the Chargers came back and in their powder blue uniforms moved out to a 19-14 lead and were on the verge of scoring again, potentially putting the game out of reach. But a deflection of a pass and an interception in the end zone by Dan Connors thwarted the Charger drive and gave new life to the Raiders, who had now made it a habit of pulling themselves off the mat. But after a short drive stalled, San Diego got the ball back and were in position to put up more points. But a field goal was missed, and the Raiders had one more chance. Mike Siani made a reception on a long pass from LaMonica, but was injured on the play. He was replaced by Cliff Branch, who took in a pass across the middle and moved the Raiders within scoring position. With a little more than a minute left, Charlie Smith skirted around the left side of the line into the end zone, and the Raiders had secured their division title and a return to the playoffs. In Week 13, the Jets came to town before what would be the largest TV audience in Monday Night Football history. Joe Namath was back, and his early passing was spectacular, giving New York the early lead. But a solid performance by the Raiders resulted in a 24-16 victory that sent a record Coliseum crowd of nearly 55,000 home happy and set the team up for one final home game against the Chicago Bears after winning their fifth straight game. In the home finale against the Bears, Marv Hubbard, who finished the season with a record 1,100 yards rushing, was presented with the Gorman Award before the start of the game. Charlie Smith scored twice and Pete Banaszak once as the Raiders eased past Chicago 28-21 before a 38th consecutive sellout crowd in Oakland, and the Raiders entered the playoffs with a 10-3-1 record as well as a division title. Pittsburgh was hosting its first ever playoff game, and the Raiders found themselves right back to where they were when the season started, at the stadium by the Three Rivers. But even as this was a game where Al Davis's team was opposed by one of Davis's friends and former coaching colleagues, Chuck Noll, this game was shrouded in controversy, in amazement, and in sheer incredulity. So much, in fact, that we will devote an entire episode to the game that resulted in the play quite simply known worldwide as the Immaculate Reception. For this episode, I would like to thank Mike Siani and Christine Setting Clark, Murray Olderman, Mark Grabowski, and NFL Films. Make sure to visit my YouTube channel, T3 Sports Guy, and subscribe so you can catch up on all the Raiders' history year by year. I would also like to thank my producer, Heidi Stabbert. You can check out both Heidi and me, along with Raider Homer, on the Only Nation podcast as we continue to follow the Silver and Black. Our next stop on this Raiders journey will be a closer look at the 1972 AFC divisional playoff game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, nearly 50 years later, and it still hasn't been resolved. Until then, thank you so much for joining me, and I will remind you that passion always outlives fashion. Here's wishing you a bright silver moon shining in the dark black night. Stay safe, take care, and go Raiders.